So I'm excited to talk to you. I watched a couple of the episodes. They're really great. They're really funny. For you as the creator, how long has this idea for the series been in the works?
Uh, well, first of all, thank you very much. That's really kind of you to say. And I think it was about, I want to say 2000, I can't, it was like 2016 or so when I came up with the idea because I'm not like the biggest superhero fan, and I just briefly got into them for a bit. Like you know how like some like just suddenly you'll kind of like just get really into something that you weren't into in the past. Like so I watched all the Marvel movies and all the Batman movies and everything. And I I just kind of was thinking because I was an animator. I've been animating shorts for YouTube around that time too, and I just thought, oh, what would be a funny Australian superhero? And I just thought, it's funny if he definitely has no superpowers. Like he'd be a middle-aged man, and it wouldn't be like in a Gotham or a New York or something. It'd just be in the smallest suburb of Australia. So that's how Koala Man kind of was born from that idea. And the fact that he's balancing a family life, and his kind of villains uh are just sometimes just like kids that are graffitiing, or like the characters like Damo and Darren that are the the kind of just what we call deros in Australia, like derelict kind of people like that. That's just, it seems funny to me because it's so close to real life. And yeah, it was born from that, but also like the fun of I didn't want to just make it grounded. It's also funny too if he's actually versing like real intense, like actual fantastical supervillains too. And so yeah, it was born initially from that idea though.
You mentioned the YouTube shorts. You have a long history with that type of animation and voice acting and things like that. Were you nervous about bringing this little piece of Australia over and working with an American team and things like that on your vision?
Yeah, I was a little bit nervous that it would, like the classic Hollywood thing, it will go from Koala Man to be just turned into like like all the Australian stuff will be stripped away from it, and that's not impossible to happen really. But I was pretty, if anything, that was the strongest thing I kind of, I guess, fought for, or like it wasn't even a big fight though, because 20th Century totally wanted to like do something fully Australian. Uh, our showrunners, Dan Jimenez and Benji Sammet, that was, the number one goal was to keep it Aussie. And if the Australian writers said something that, that was gospel in terms of what to do. And that the fun part was the American writers and the showrunners were really inspired by what we, the Australian writers, would say. It would just throw out something and say that's normal everyday life in Australia, but the Americans would run with it and find it more interesting because it was new. And so it was a really good collaboration and dynamic. And at the end of the day, it was always to it was never to make the show feel like it was getting Hollywooded. You know what I mean? Like we never wanted to feel like, oh, it was being watered down Australiana. Like every 20th Century, Hulu and the writers and showrunners all wanted to maintain something that felt really Australian, and that was the best part for me too. That was really what I cared about.
And I think that's what made it really charming and like just kind of fun to watch because a lot of it was more about like, oh, that's so similar or that's so interesting and it was very charming. The uh the voice cast is really stacked. How did you ultimately end up with the cast that you have now?
I have no idea. I don't know. It's a really good question because I think I know we like completely lucked out because Hugo Weaving is like one of my favorite actors of all time. So even getting him to he did various parts, like just like he plays a character, just says like one line that could have been like anyone really, but he came and did it, and he researched one of the characters he plays in the finales, and really put a lot of work into that. And we got, Hugh Jackman was incredible, Sarah Snook, Jermaine Clement, uh, yeah, Demi Lovato plays Allison. Like everyone was amazing. Everyone, I think, I think for them, I would hope that having like an Australian animated sitcom for Hulu for American TV, and hopefully it's a bit interesting too because it's got a superhero spin. Was hopefully something unique and fresh for the actors who said yes. So hopefully that is the reason. It was just felt unique and fresh. I I hope.
A lot of the characters are really charming, they're really fun. And do you have any personal favorites from the characters that you've created?
Yeah, I love Big Greg probably the most. Uh, Damo and Darren, I've also like they're characters that I've had for years. I did a short called Siggy Butt Brain in like 2014 or something, and they were the characters in that, and I kind of brought them over to Koala Man, and they're always fun to write and do voices for, because they're so gross and grotty, and the stuff they say, I just still can't believe that they're in the Disney universe now, like just because like how Disney and Hulu and everything. So it's great. It's amazing. And yeah, and when it comes to Big Greg, I just think he's a great character, and the relationship with him and Koala Man is really interesting and fun to play around with. And the fact he's voiced by Hugh Jackman, yeah, he's a fun one.
Were these characters inspired from anybody in your real life?
Yeah, I reckon it's an amalgamation of a lot of people. You see a lot of Damo and Darrens in Australia. You see a lot of Kevins and slash Koala Man. That's definitely an archetype. The Aussie man that's extremely kind of, I guess, like a pedant and uh worried about like things like littering and just small things like small suburban things like that, and fancies himself a little bit of an intellectual. It because a lot of when people think of like an Aussie man, they usually think of like a rugged Big Greg type. But to me, like what's more funnier is like the Kevin kind of losery middle aged guy like that. So yeah, they're all inspired by kind of like a mix of people that I've run into in my life.
That's so fun. And then also part of the charm of the show is like the animation style. How do you decide on which way to go when it comes to animation on a series like this?
So the animation in this show is quite different from what I've done in the past. This particular project uh was trying to fit in more with the 20th century Fox kind of, well, not Fox, now it's 20th century studios, but like essentially like the Simpsons, the Rick and Morty, like the King of the Hills of animation, trying to fit into that world where the characters are a bit more on model. It's a bit more uniform, so it just kind of has a uniformity to it. Because I've done a cartoon, my style is kind of shitty. Like my drawing is very off model. So I definitely wanted to have it a little bit more elevated for this particular show. Uh, just so because this was an experiment. This whole show was an experimentation in collaborating. In terms of like the showrunners, the animators, the writers, and everything. I feel like I'm more curating this show. This is so it's not like my like I don't even think I could sit down and animate a Koala Man scene. I'm too shit. Like we got better animators for that. So yeah, it's I hope that answers your question.
Absolutely, it does. And then the last question I kind of have for you is the show is very self-aware and pulls a lot from like the real world, but how do you manage to keep the show feeling relevant but not too serious?
Um, I think it's because we've got a philosophy where this is set in like a bizarre, like fantasy Australia. So it's not really our world. Because like there's lots of things that have happened in this certain Australia that hasn't happened in our universe. So uh but it's still hopefully grounded. It still feels like real life, and it, it's a definitely a balancing act, right? Because like we still want, it's a tough show to write for, and because we still want it to be grounded and to comment to like be a commentary on like everyday things. And you've got like Mrs. Banks with the Blu-ray player, and just scenes that are very grounded, but also like we want it to have like high fantasy and be exciting. And and kind of subvert your expectations, because we didn't want Koala Man to always be facing off with someone that is just the suburban villain that has no superpowers too. We kind of wanted to surprise people and be like, no, wait, he could actually fight like a monster. So like, it's a tough one, but like to answer your question, it makes sense to us that that can all exist because this is in some kind of bizarre fantasy Australia world that's only can exist in animation, really.
Well, congratulations on the series. It's very charming. I can't wait for audiences to see it. And thank you so much for taking the time to speak with us today.
No worries. Thanks, Monica. Cheers. Appreciate it.
Have a great day.
You too. See you later.